the Chinese sure do love a monster movie, and they certainly love a monster shark movie. I've reviewed a few Chinese shark-related films on the channel previously, and here we have a 2023 entry. The English translation of the title is Shark Evil, also known as White Shark. Obviously, the Chinese name I'm not going to try and pronounce here. So, what is the story? It primarily focuses on a group of friends that go out on a yacht to for a celebration, basically, and whilst they are there, they discover a seemingly abandoned fishing vessel and go and investigate. But the reason there's an abandoned fishing vessel is because they have been killed by a seemingly scarred up monster shark earlier on. And now this shark has its eye on these kind of group of youngsters. Now, what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works with Shark Evil. So the Chinese kind of monster movie machine that kind of pumps out a lot of these kind of style films tends to be a little similar, to be honest with you. And I think this one isn't really breaking the mould, although it does have a little bit more tension than I think some of them I've seen previously, to be honest with you. This movie does have a degree of, a feeling of atmosphere in it, which I think sometimes is lacking from a lot of these kind of Chinese productions. It opens really strong. We actually see the fate of this kind of fishing vessel at the beginning of the movie, and to me, this was actually the highlight of the film. This was the best sequence in the movie because this kind of creature is treated really kind of like some type of X Factor, some like unknown kind of creature. And it's kind of suggested that the crew of this kind of fishing vessel have actually had some run-ins. And the shark itself is somewhat kind of interesting because it's more the size of a megalodon than a great white. But it's all sort of scarred up. It has various kind of wounds on it, and even kind of like pikes and things sticking out of it. Most notably, it has a chain kind of wrapped around its tail, that kind of like trails behind it, and it actually uses this as a kind of like an unintentional kind of weapon. So the creature is interesting. So it looks like it has some history, certainly with the captain of this particular kind of fishing vessel, but it's not like you definitely need to find out what it is. You can make the assumption that there's been some kind of altercations, and you kind of like, you get that Moby Dick vibe from it, basically. So we have this kind of sequence. What I've got to say it's pretty strong at the beginning of the movie, and then it kind of goes into our main sort of characters, which I don't think ever really kind of quite lives up to that opening sequence, but there are still a couple of kind of fun sort of sequences in regards to this kind of shark and this monstrousness of it, and how it kind of it takes out these kind of groups of friends. The movie actually primarily, I would say, from the kind of the second half of the film, really focuses on the relationship between kind of two of the kind of like the remaining survivors, and how they have a bit of a misconstrued relationship, is all I'll kind of say, which kind of, again, it kind of plays into these kind of sort of you'll get these in these kind of creature features. You have these kind of love triangles and various kind of like interpersonal relationships to kind of pad out the drama, and it's true with this one as well. The CGI is never particularly good in these Chinese produced sort of monster films. Obviously I know that the Meg 2 and the Meg were co-produced by China, but this is a purely produced Chinese movie. But I will say the CGI looks better than a lot of them. I mean, it certainly still looks like a CGI kind of creature, but there is some sequences here I do think the shark looks a little, a little bit better rendered than some, a little bit more animated than some of the films, but it still has an air of kind of fakeness about it. And like I said, it's maybe a little bit too over-exaggerated to be considered really a true, realistic kind of shark film and things like that. There are some quite nice directorial flourishes within this movie as well. Again, the Chinese kind of like movie machine tends to be kind of fairly formulaic and serviceable, but nothing too artistic from the ones I've seen. This one I would say does have a little bit of kind of flourish in regards to its directorial style. You know, some kind of quite kind of interesting kind of angles and kind of sequences that are filmed in an interesting manner. And I think, although it's difficult to really tell with when you're watching a foreign language movie how the kind of the acting is, you know, I'm reading a translation which, I'll be honest with you, did not sound like it was the actual translation of what they were saying. It's a very rough translation, but it seemed fine. The acting kind of seemed fine in this film, and it's, you know, it's a fairly kind of short running time. It was kind of fairly exciting with some reasonable kind of shark attacks. So what doesn't work? Okay, as I've mentioned, I think that the highlight of this film is its opening sequence, and I feel the movie never really kind of lives up to that kind of that level, you know, that kind of heightened sense of danger again in the film, even in the finale, which is fine, but it's not as good as that kind of opening sort of sequence. So the movie really kind of feels like it's somewhat kind of petering out. The pace of the movie also significantly kind of changes. Around the kind of like the halfway mark, we stop to have this kind of relationship building kind of sequences that kind of feels a little long, to be honest, in regards to these kind of two survivors, without much kind of in the way of the shark. You almost forget the shark exists for a while. I feel maybe they could have a little bit of pacing in regards to these kind of shark attacks to be not quite as lumped in and 180 in sequences and be a bit more peppered throughout, if that makes sense too. So it gives it an odd pace, to be honest. It's quite fast paced at the beginning, then it kind of slows down, and then we have that kind of obviously the sequence at the end where we have this kind of obviously kind of final confrontation. So it's not a particularly kind of original movie in any particular way, and it's very much like, even though this does have some, I would say, artistic flourishes, you know, I mean, how many different stories can you possibly have about kind of shark attacks being out at sea? You know, it's kind of, it is what it is. It's kind of a very kind of cookie cutter plot. I think some of the characters are a little bit kind of cliche. You know, we get the nice girl, we get the kind of the social media kind of one, we get the comedic kind of like male character, we get the kind of like the, you know, the good kind of like altruistic kind of like male character. So even though I feel maybe the people might not survive in the order that you would expect, there are a lot of kind of like typical kind of characters here that you've just seen in many other films like this. In particular, the kind of the Chinese market. It's certainly not going to redefine the wheel in any kind of meaningful way. As I've mentioned, I think the CGI is probably better than some in regards to some of these kind of Chinese films, but you're still looking at kind of like, you know, good level kind of sci-fi movie channel style kind of CGI here. It's certainly not obviously of a you know, blockbuster kind of standard, but it's fine if you're kind of familiar with kind of like B movies and things like this. I mean, there are some kind of sequences here that I think border on the kind of like the parody kind of level, how the shark is able to kind of launch itself out of the water. And I know great whites can do that, but this thing is massive. You know, it's kind of like the flying shark at certain times. And yes, I know that grey whites can breach, but not when they're this size. It will be simply just too heavy. So yeah, it's a little silly at times, a little goofy. I mean, the shark looks a little more monstrous than a kind of a genuine kind of like great white and things like that. But the movie is fine. It's just okay. I mean, like I said, I think the pacing could have been better to make this more evenly paced, because it's very kind of action heavy in the first act, and then kind of in the really the kind of the middle act, it slows down quite a lot, and a kind of short third act. So it's a little bit of a kind of uneven pace, but it's very much what you expect. It's absolutely fine if you're familiar with kind of Chinese monster movies. I would say it's maybe slightly better than a lot of them I have seen, but it certainly doesn't elevate this kind of genre into anything really particularly kind of worthwhile. And although it does have create a little bit of fear and anxiety and kind of like good atmosphere, I feel it kind of like it ends up kind of dissipating because of maybe the kind of the somewhat kind of poor pacing. So for me, it's kind of like an average shark film in many ways. It's certainly not bad, it's watchable, but I don't think you'll kind of remember it. It's not going to be in anyone's top 5 shark movies, I don't think. So 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.